Hey everyone, Bible Nerd here. I wanted to talk to you today about the real nativity scene. Recently, we went to a movie called The Best Christmas Pageant Ever. Dallas Jenkins, who's in charge of The Chosen, the director of The Chosen, was working to get the rights to this book for quite a while, really wanted to put this to film, and does an amazing job. The movie just came out for this season, and I think the camera work, the actors, and the story is really true to the book. I think he did a really, really good job. So I highly recommend during the Christmas season. It's just a great movie to watch. It really kind of pulls at some heartstrings, really lays down some really important messages that really tie to that book. But there's a great scene where they're in the Christmas pageant, they have the nativity scene, and they flash back to Mary and Joseph, kind of flashback back and forth. And it's just a really powerful scene because you see the dirtiness and the grunginess and the animals. You see a much more real version of what that scene must have looked like. And too often with our nativity scenes, they become a little more iconic. They kind of drift a little bit from the historical roots. So I think it's important to kind of get into the reality of what it was versus what we've turned into tradition and what we've softened. And I have no problem with nativity scenes. I think they're beautiful, a great reminder. I love seeing them as I drive around town, either in front of people's houses or maybe on public buildings if they're willing to do that. One of our mortuaries actually in town has this scene they put out every year. They put lights to it. It's really as cool driving by it all the time to see that depicted. But there's also some things that are influenced by tradition more than actual reality. So for today's podcast, I wanted to kind of break down the actual real nativity scene to just kind of spend a little time on what it actually must have been like instead of the softened versions that we see on yards and see on the front steps of a building perhaps. So the nativity scene, as we know, is often portrayed as this beautiful tableette feature with Mary and Joseph. You've got baby Jesus, you've got shepherds, the wise men, you've got chorus of angels. But have you ever really stopped to think how much of that is reality? So let's start with the setting. Most nativity scenes depict this cozy barn. I think almost all of them have this little barn, very westernized kind of looking normal barn that's got hay and maybe animals in the distance. You got twinkling stars. Everybody looks cozy. Everybody looks comfortable after they've gone through a birth of a human. And anybody can tell you it's not a clean experience, not what's going on there, and let alone where it most likely happened. It's very common in the Bethlehem area that the caves were used, or very, very humble dwellings at best, that weren't fully insulated, that were with the livestock, which if you've been on a farm, if you've been around animals of horses and cows and all that kind of stuff, they're not the cleanest of creatures. They're going to the restroom wherever they want. They're going all over the place. They're kind of sloppy with the way they eat their food. It's not the cleanest of environments, especially to have a child. In fact, if you look at Israelite tradition, they would present the babies after 40 days to the temple or to the priest, because unfortunately, many of them wouldn't make it that far because of the unsanitary conditions or not having access to medical, sterilized environments. So Jesus being born into that is just such a humble start and almost a threat to his life before it even gets started. I mean, he's around who knows what kind of animal feces. And I mean, I don't want to get too graphic on the podcast here, but you can kind of get the idea. This is not a very clean sanitary area, on top of just the medical practices and everything that's going on while you're giving birth. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of fluids going on, all kinds of stuff already in a dirty environment. Let's also talk about the visitors. So the shepherds, as we're told in Luke's gospel, were definitely part of that scene. But they were lowly, they were marginalized in society, but they were the first to receive this joyous news. Contrary to a peaceful and serene scene, I would think that the shepherds were also pretty rough and pretty outcast and struggled to be accepted. They were on the outside of the city, and they're yet the first ones to get announced. So a lot of times I see the shepherds are portrayed as very clean looking, and that's probably not true. They're probably just as dirty and grubby and haven't showered for who knows how long, and they're the first ones to get invited into the scene. The other one that I see is often depicted maybe incorrectly is the wise men or the magi. These figures are often depicted as regal kings presenting gifts, but I don't think that's what it would have been. There would have been astrologers from Persia, so they're not even part of the culture, but they could identify what was happening even in the stars, that something miraculous had happened, that a king has been born from the predictions and things that they were watching by being astrologers. But often it's depicted as three, where magi is plural, so there's probably more than one, but there's no number given. We don't know if it was 2 or 5 or 10. We don't really know, but it's often depicted as 3 because of the number of gifts. And so does it really matter if there's 2 or 10? No, I don't think that matters, but I think oftentimes it's portrayed at the birth when most likely it could have been even up to 2 years old. Now, how do we know that? Because Herod says, okay, I need to kill all the newborn boys under the age of 2. So there is an indication that the Magi probably came presenting these gifts later on. It was not at the actual scene in the manger, that type of thing. But it's still part of the nativity story, if you will. So I don't have a problem that they're kind of there, but they realize they may be kind of out of place. So they're, part 2. We've got the manger over here. Then part 2 is when the Magi show up to offer these incredible gifts. But you can also see that they probably saw the star, saw what was happening, and then that's when they started to travel towards Jerusalem, end up being, and so there probably was a time gap between maybe that birth star, the time they were led from wherever they happened to be, whether it was directly in Persia or somewhere else. They start to travel to head towards this phenomenon that they believe is some sort of birth of the king of the Jews, or this new king has been born. But it could have been as much as 2 years later, because that's what we see from Herod wanting to get rid of this newborn king. He doesn't say, hey, go kill all the babies. He says up to 2 years old. So we know there's a gap between when the Magi actually visited. And then lastly, I have to mention Mary and Joseph. I mean, this scene is a little too surreal or too soft, I think. I mean, these guys were young. They were likely in their teens. They were facing societal scorn for maybe an unexpected or illegitimate pregnancy. They were facing immense challenges. They had to travel. They weren't wealthy, but they had to travel. So they have this grueling journey to even get to Bethlehem. Then they get there and end up going into a barn. I mean, the stress of that night. I mean, even today, it's a stressful thing when you break water and you're getting ready to run to the hospital or whatever you have to do. I can't imagine what it would have been like for everybody in that ancient world, but let alone their situation, that grueling journey to Bethlehem, that late term, and then all of a sudden you've got a pregnancy on top of that. And the fact that the mortality rate was so low, and now you're in this dirty area. I mean, there had to be so much going on up to that particular moment. So our modern nativity scenes, I think, tend to overlook the overarching message of humility and hope from the actual story. The real nativity scene embodies the harsh reality of life, but also embraces a profound truth. God chose to enter our world through these humble circumstances, reflecting his heartfelt desire to be with humanity and be that saving grace. Recently, I was at an Advent art show that had some artwork, and one of the most impressive pieces of art I saw was Eve and Mary. And Eve had the snake kind of around her heel, had an apple sitting there, and she was kind of touching the stomach area of Mary, and Mary was kind of touching her face. And it just set me back, because I was thinking about how the blame of the fall of humanity was on Adam and Eve especially, and that there was a promised child that was going to redeem that mistake, redeem humanity. And here he is in Mary's womb. I really got struck by that particular scene as we were going through this Advent art walk, and really spent some time just really reflecting on what that picture was trying to portray. Now, that's not biblical. There's not a time that it's recorded that Mary met Eve or anything like that. But I think that the artist was just kind of playing on these two major women in the Bible, and how that promised child, that snake crusher, that savior, that Messiah is born to redeem the sin of the world. So as we think about the nativity scene this season, let's take a moment to reflect on its true story. The essence of Christmas lies not just with visuals we create or iconicize or soften, but it's a message of love, of humility, and redemption that transcends time. So thank you for joining me today. I encourage you to dig deeper into the story that's behind the tradition. Actually read in Luke and read the narratives. And I'd love to have you share this episode with family and friends who might enjoy maybe a new or fresh reminder or perspective on nativity. And I'd love to have you like and comment, subscribe, be a part of this. I really enjoy doing the podcast and thinking about these things, and just love to see where this goes. But I think it's just important to reflect on the real things that were happening during the nativity scene. So until next time, keep seeking the truth behind the tales. Have a Merry Christmas, and we'll see you next time.